Welcome back to Champions and Beyond. Today we're going to continue with our series looking at what comes in each pack for the Marvel Champions living card game. In today's video we are going to look at the first release after the core box came out. The first release was actually 3 products. So you've got the Green Goblin Scenario Pack, you've got the Captain America Hero Pack, and you've got the Miss Marvel Hero Pack. Today we are just going to concentrate on the Green Goblin Scenario Pack. All 3 of these products were released on the 20th of December 2019. So just a couple of months after the core set was out. And once you added them, it gave you an extra 2 scenarios, an extra 4 modular encounter sets, and an extra 2 heroes. So the first thing you receive within the Green Goblin Scenario Pack was a little rules booklet, little 8-page booklet. Within it, it contains a bit of information about the pack, and then a shield briefing, which was their storytelling element for the scenario. It came with additional rules that you might need when encountering this scenario, and then it came with a brief strategy guide for the scenario. After that, it also contained the shield briefing for the mutagen formula, the second scenario in the box, as well as the additional rules and the tactics guide. On the back was all the credits, the designers, the playtesters, and all of that sort of thing. Generally, once you've played the scenarios a few times, you won't need to technically look at the book that often. Maybe just to refresh yourself with a few of the scenario specific interactions and that sort of thing. But it's a nice little product to accompany the scenario set. So in the scenario Risky Business, Norman Osborn is attempting to buy a portion of Stark Industries and use Stark's tech to augment his own tech for the Green Goblin. He is seen as a shady businessman, but because heroes can't just go and punch a shady businessman in the face, the aim is that you have to wind him up so much that he becomes the Green Goblin, and then you can take him out. So the way they did the scenario was each identity card is double-sided. So you have Norman Osborn on one side and you have the Green Goblin on the other. Every time you flip to the Green Goblin, he will deal damage. In stage 1, he deals damage to every hero. In stage 2 and stage 3, it's just indirect damage to every player. You have to do this by removing and placing counters on a environment that's in play. Either he has his criminal enterprise, in which case while his criminal enterprise is in place he will be Norman Osborn, or you send him mad by taking apart his criminal enterprise, send him into a state of madness where he will then flip to the Green Goblin. This scenario is probably one of the easier scenarios within Marvel Champions. There is a very clear way in which you can game the Green Goblin, in this scenario anyway. And because of that, it's not seen as much love from the community, shall we say. I still think if you build a deck to not game it, and you play in a way that doesn't game the scenario, it can be a lot of fun. It can be challenging. It isn't the hardest scenario, but it does fill a really interesting gap by having a villain that's also flipping between sort of villain and alter ego. Quite an interesting choice, especially early on in the game's life cycle. The second scenario was the mutagen formula. Now, the story behind the mutagen formula is that Norman has gone mad. He is now always Green Goblin, and he's dumping green gas upon the citizens of New York. And that gas is turning them into mutated goblins that are going mad and attacking other civilians. For this stage of the game, the risky business scenario was probably, along with Ultron, the most minion heavy scenario that was out there. You have a lot of minions in his deck, and because of that, it was probably, I think, depending on who you speak to, one will say Ultron and one will say mutagen formula as the toughest scenario at this stage of the game's life cycle. But it's a lot of fun. It's not impossible to beat. Another thing to always keep in mind when you either flip from stage 1 to stage 2, or if you start on expert, you start on stage 2, and then when you flip on stage 3, the Green Goblin deals every player 2 or 3 when you go into stage 3 encounter cards. So that turn you flip the Green Goblin is going to be a really rough turn for everyone at the table. You have to make sure you're set up to either rush down stage 2 and therefore not having to deal with all those cards, or you're having to make sure that you're set up well enough that you can cope with whatever's going to come out. A lot of fun. He also had a card, without going too much into the kit, he did have a card that allowed him to attack a player that was in alter ego, which was another quite interesting mechanic. You always seem to think with the core set and with risky business, at least, when you went to alter ego, you were safe. Green Goblin made sure that you didn't have that safety net. There was then 4 modular encounter sets that came within the Green Goblin villain pack. The first of those was Goblin Gimmicks, probably the easiest of the 4. And on difficulty level, it ranks around about the same as the Bomb Scare. 8-card encounter set. It's attachments that don't do anything the turn they come out, so it's quite an easy encounter phase for the heroes. And then they will either give effects. The Goblin Glider gives +1 attack, and that can be on Green Goblin, or it can start to be on minions. There are 2 copies of it, as well as 2 copies of Pumpkin Bombs, some healing cards, and that sort of thing. So it can be quite fun to mix in with scenarios that you want to imagine the villain flying around on a Goblin Glider, throwing pumpkin bombs at you. But unfortunately, it is on the easier side. And I say unfortunately, if you want to make a scenario easier, this is a fairly decent option. because it is on the lower end of the difficulty. If you want things to be more challenging, then this isn't a modular encounter set that you're going to pull out that often. So the second encounter set was a mess of things, which was Scorpion. Scorpion plays a lot on stunning. Every time he attacks, he can stun an enemy, which obviously prevents you from attacking. It's a fun modular. It's not anywhere apart from kind of the middle of the difficulty. So for anything that's just you want to do something different within a scenario, it's a good modular encounter set. If you have ways to deal with being stunned, if you have heroes that can gain steady or stalwart, then it's going to be less impactful. But for this stage of the game, it was a fairly challenging module set, especially if, for example, you were playing Justice or Protection, that you weren't dealing a lot of attacks. The fact that that cancels your next attack can be huge. If you were Spider-Man playing Protection and all your damage was really coming from your swinging web kicks, you're having to waste a full swinging web kick just to get rid of a stun, and then Scorpion's going to stun you again in the next turn anyway. So can be impactful, is a fun little modular set. 5 cards. The next modular encounter set is Power Drain, and Power Drain was Electro. So the Electro modular set, the Power Drain modular set, is all around discarding cards from the top of the villain deck, from the top of the encounter deck. Now, this means that you get closer to acceleration icons. You can potentially trigger other effects for later villains. Sandman, much later on, deals indirect damage every time that he goes through his deck and you place an acceleration icon. And for the core set, if you add Power Drain into Claw, who is already going through his encounter deck very quickly because of his double boost icons for his attacks, this can just accelerate that and get the game away from you before you can really set up. Fun little modular. Again, kind of middle of the road for difficulty. The fourth modular encounter set is Running Interference. And Running Interference was Tombstone. So Tombstone is the biggest minion to date, I believe, with this one. 9 health when he comes out, so you can't just take care of him with a swinging web kick like you can with MODOK. And his cards are really revolved around making the heroes have an even worse day. So he has a card that attaches to a hero, and anytime they reveal a treachery card from the encounter deck, they have to do it twice. So suddenly, if you draw a second attack from Green Goblin or from Rhino, you have to take a second and a third attack. If you draw an advance, the villain will scheme twice and therefore get very close, if not completing their schemes. Tombstone was the most difficult of the 4 encounter sets that come with the Green Goblin. So overall, is the Green Goblin scenario pack worth picking up? Well, if you're buying in a progression style, then of course it's going to be worth picking up. you are nearly doubling the amount of encounters, of scenarios that you have within the core set. You're going from 3 to 5, and you are nearly doubling the amount of modular encounter sets that you have. You're going from 5 to 9. So all of a sudden, even without adding anything else, this is almost doubling the options that you have when playing just your core set heroes. If you're not buying progression style, is this worth having? Yes. Green Goblin mutagen formula is still seen as one of the more difficult encounters, but it's also seen as a lot of people's favourite encounter. The Green Goblin is a very iconic villain, and because of this, he holds a place for most collectors of Marvel Champions. So overall, this is definitely a set I would suggest to pick up if you're enjoying Marvel Champions and if you want to increase the replayability, the modularity. This gives you a ton of extra options, and both scenarios can still be beaten with just core set cards. So as an early purchase, this is a no-brainer. Thank you very much for watching. Until next time, happy gaming.